What's up, Coachable family? Welcome back to the Coachable podcast. I'm so glad you are here. Today is going to be absolutely amazing because we actually have two guests joining me from Miami. And I'm so grateful to our good friend Jen Gottlieb, who was recently on the show, for introducing us to the co-founders and co-CEOs of MindBodyGreen. We've got Colleen and Jason Wachob in the house. It's going to be such a good conversation because you guys, if you have ever struggled with any of the following, whether that be struggling to get a good night's sleep, chronic stress, not being able to get the movement practices in that you want, struggling with your purpose, then this conversation truly is going to be for you. Just to give you a little bit of background on both Colleen and Jason, Jason is the host of a popular Mind Body Green podcast, the best-selling author of Wealth, How I Learned to Build a Life, Not a Resume. I love that title. He's been featured in all major publications and has a BA in history from Columbia University. His wife is just as brilliant, getting her degree from Stanford. She spent 10 years working in Fortune 500 companies, including Gap, Walmart, and Amazon. And now, as I mentioned, they're the co-CEOs of MindBodyGreen, which is a leading independent media brand dedicated to well-being with 15 million unique monthly visitors. These guys are going to help us understand the difference between wellness and well-being and what you can do to start your journey to well-being and finding joy in life. So without further ado, welcome, Colleen, Jason. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having us. Such a warm and kind intro. It's an honor.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, I mentioned that Jen Gottlieb, who was recently on the show, made the gracious introduction to you guys. And as soon as I found out that you were connected to MindBodyGreen, I knew we were going to have so much to talk about because I've been following you guys since I started this podcast, probably even before that. And it's been such a resource for me personally in my own journey to health and wellness and happiness. And it's kind of difficult to weed through all the noise, especially when it comes to your health. Let's just start by giving us a little bit of background on why you started MindBodyGreen to begin with.
Sure. So what's been interesting about the journey, and it has been a journey over 14 years now since we founded MindBodyGreen, is the whys have changed. And the first why was my struggle with my lower back, specifically sciatica. I had excruciating sciatica in my right leg, the classic L4, L5, S1.
Mm-hmm.
And so my right leg felt like a lightning rod. I couldn't walk. It was excruciating. And did we lose you?
Nope, I'm here.
Okay. So sorry, because the camera
That's
left
okay.
you. I'll continue. And so I had excruciating pain in my right leg. It felt like a lightning rod. I could not walk. And it was a tough time. I was running a startup that wasn't doing so well. That startup had me flying over 100,000 miles domestic. I am 6'7". Me in a coach seat is not good for me or the person in front of me. The stress of the startup, the flying, and old basketball injury from college led to the disc problem. And I was just really suffering in every sense of the world, spiritually, emotionally, and physically.
Mm-hmm.
And went to a doctor and he said, you need back surgery. I have nothing against back surgery or surgeries, or more generally surgery, but generally see it as last resort. So I sought a second opinion. That doctor said the same thing. He said, you need back surgery. And it was almost like an afterthought. He said, you know what, maybe some yoga or therapy could help. And I said, okay. Colleen and I were dating at the time. Colleen had a yoga practice. I said, I'll try yoga. So started with some really light yoga, 5 to 10 minutes in the morning and evening. And I started to feel better. And over the course of 6 months, I completely healed. And yoga played a significant role along with, nutrition. I changed my diet. I originally was a steak and martinis guy, consumed so much. My face is on the wall of the Palm Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan next to Joe Namath and Adam Sandler.
Nice.
It kind of egregious, but it is, that's what I thought health was. And again, through the process and in terms of nutrition today, it's definitely evolved. Still eat meat, but try to make sure it's grass-fed and so on. It's a complicated topic. I'll leave it at that. And so it was through that process, we kind of had this moment where we looked around and it was so clear. Now, this is 2009. the word wellness was equated with kind of like the spa or anything holistic was like very new agey and
Mhm.
crazy and kind of a little bit out there, and it was just clear that wellness, and we'll talk about the transition to well-being. Wellness was about mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, and environmental well-being. And all these things were interconnected, hence MindBodyGreen, one word. And our goal back then was, let's just not preach the choir of people who live in the west side of LA or Brooklyn or Boulder. We all know the type.
Mhm.
Let's build a bigger church. And this is the future. And that was the vision, the original big vision for MindBodyGreen. And it started out of our apartment. And since then, our whys have changed. My why has shifted to longevity. I'm 48 now. We have two little girls, ages 6 and almost 4. Men in my family have a terrible track record here. My father died of heart disease at 47. My paternal grandfather died of heart disease at 49. And my other grandfather, cancer at 44. So it's not good. But I do believe in epigenetics. I do believe we that our genes are not our destiny. We have the power to turn on and off genes through lifestyle modification. And that's been, the why in the last few years and led to the book, because science has advanced so much here and there's so much we can do, yet it feels so inaccessible. And that's been a pain point. And Colleen's had a major why event as well.
Yeah, what's happened for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I had one of those breakdown moments that led to, huge life transformation. So I was doing the corporate route, as you mentioned, and in my early 30s, so over a decade ago, and struggling to find purpose, working out hard, doing the things that felt quote unquote healthy. And one Saturday morning in May, I came from my morning routine on Saturdays of going to Tara Stiles' 11 a.m. strong yoga class. It was my Saturday ritual. It's one of the first hot, nice May days. And I left class and I felt a little bit out of breath. And so I called Jason. I was like, hey, can you meet me in the West Village? This just doesn't feel right. We walked around and I was like, I think I need to go home. So we took the subway home and we got off at the A train, which is one of the steepest steps stations in Brooklyn. And I was walking up the stairs and collapsed and eventually got up, walked out of the station and called my general practitioner and was like, something really weird just happened. But I did the worst possible thing. I then proceeded to gaslight myself and my own symptoms, which I knew were an aberration, but I didn't want to go to the ER. So I just continued to gaslight myself and ignore these symptoms. Whole weekend was a complete aberration. I napped. I was lethargic, not how I typically spend a weekend. On Monday morning, before I went to my job at Amazon, Jason said, the only way I'm letting you go to work is if you stop by the doctor on the way. Stop by the doctor. Within a couple minutes, he's like, you're having a pulmonary embolism. And I was so confused and so bewildered that he gave me the sign that said, I'm having a pulmonary embolism. I wasn't quite sure if he was worried I wouldn't actually make it to the NYU ER, or if I got there, he was concerned I wouldn't be able to immediately articulate what was the likely scenario of what was happening in my body. And I had showers of clots in my lungs and was really lucky to be alive and avoid something super catastrophic. And that was one of these life inflection points that was this massive cosmic kick in the butt from the universe of, okay, you didn't listen to the whispers that I was trying to tell you that something is off track here, that you're not really living in alignment. So I'm just going to give you a really big kick. And that started a very long healing journey. And I saw a ton of Western doctors. I saw a ton of healers. And what's interesting is I don't have significant predispositions to clotting, but I had been on birth control pills for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so the likely culprit of my clot was a birth control pill. And I had read about the risks, but I think I had kind of labeled them as things that happened to people who were smokers or overweight. And, I didn't fit this risk criteria. I wrote an article about this experience on MindBodyGreen in the early days and went completely viral. Mm-hmm. And women came out of the woodworks who had sisters, who had mothers, who had friends, who had had this same experience, many of them ending in very tragic ways. Mm-hmm. And, through this experience, I I learned I really need to be a lot more mindful of what I'm putting into my body, especially when pharmaceuticals are involved. And I really do need to take control and be the CEO of it. And started a 6-month healing process, if not longer, where I was really struggling with the most fundamental element of life, which is breath. It was the first time in my life I had given breath any thought. And I struggled to sit on a subway train. And I remember fighting senior citizens almost for seats on the subway so that I could breathe on the way home. And humans breathe 17,000 to 30,000 times a day. And that was kind of the start of this very long healing journey, reconnecting to my breath, trying Western, trying healing. And it was this wonderful game of Marco Polo where I was trying to just figure out what made me feel better in this instance. And, The Joy of Well-Being, the book that Jason and I have co-authored, is very much the roadmap I wish I had over a decade ago when I was starting this healing journey, so that perhaps I could have been more efficient on it.
Sure. I mean, I know the importance of a roadmap like this, because when I hear you guys tell your own personal stories of overcoming your health struggles, I think to my own experience with that. My family and I have spent multiple Christmases in the hospital due to multiple different cancer diagnoses in my family. Lost my sister at 23 to leukemia, my mother at 63 to ovarian cancer. There's heart failure all throughout my family. So I know anyone listening can, whether it's they've personally experienced it, they know someone who has died prematurely or is currently struggling with health. And there's nothing more frustrating or debilitating when your body isn't operating the way that you know it's designed to operate, right? And you're like, I just feel so defeated. And so I think what you are doing with MindBodyGreen, but also with your book, The Joy of Well-Being, which is a roadmap to health, wealth, and joy. We need this because, as you guys were saying, it's hard to sort of navigate and understand, where do you even start? And so I want to start by sort of differentiating what you were talking about, Jason, the difference in wellness and well-being. What is wellness in your opinion, and how does it differ from well-being?
We have a very complicated relationship with the word wellness. And I think at, a very surface level, you could describe a lot of the things on MindBodyGreen as wellness. And we have found so much personal, familial, and communal value in these principles that have helped change our life. But then I think that what causes me pause is it feels like a cacophony of advice, a cacophony of things. And one of my friends, JJ Virgin, had this great line that's, you have to bake the cake before you can put on the frosting. And when I look at the wellness world, there's so much of an emphasis on the frosting, the gadgets, the tools, how it looks. And don't get me wrong, all of those things can be really fun and additive to my life. And I've got lots of fun wellness tools in my life too. But I think it takes the dialogue and the focus away from these foundational, time-tested principles, which is really where we all need to start our wellness journey when we are out of that equilibrium. And what I love about the word well-being is it really takes the conversation outside of the self. It takes it to something bigger. It takes us to this idea that we are all connected and that our own well-being is tied to that of our community and our planet and something bigger in the world than just ourselves.
And just to add, we've come so far and it's been so exciting, but it feels overwhelming and impossible. And if you think about the major objections to people taking control of their health, it's time and resources, financial resources.
Yeah.
And we've started to feel this, and we're in this business. Like, this is our passion and our love. And it really started to feel like all this advancement caters to the 1% of the 1%. And what does longevity look like for the rest of us?
Right.
The 99% of people who have a demanding job, who maybe have a partner, spouse, kids, daily chores, other commitments. And, we view wellness almost as like the destination or the shiny, happy thing or the frosting, whereas well-being is the journey. It's this process. And, for us, what's been great about the science is we felt like these are the things that no one wants you to know about. Like so many of the takeaways in the science point to practices or modalities that take very little time, or are free, or cost very little money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's powerful. And to Colleen mentioned, it's important to be your CEO of your own, of your health. And we think we can get people there. And we also think we can get people there in a way where they're joyful.
Mm.
Because what's the point of being around until you're 100 years old if you're not having fun? Some people talk about health span. I want to be around to be mobile and healthy and fit, but what's the point if you're not living a joyful life, if you don't have meaningful connection, if your family members don't talk to you, if you have,
Sure.
if you're miserable. And so those joy and health don't have to be mutually exclusive.
I love that. I love that. And sometimes I think it's only when we have some sort of like breakdown, and maybe that is manifests as some kind of physical dis-ease or rupture that makes you like wake up and get your attention. I know for me, it was when my sister passed away at 23 that I was like, okay, I thought we were going to live forever. This was just this huge awakening to my own mortality and recognizing that, like you said, I had to become responsible for my health and my longevity. And if I wanted to live a long, purposeful, fulfilled life, then I had to stop running and avoiding and ignoring the things my body was telling me and be willing to face it and ask it what it was trying to show me. What kind of, it needs my attention, you know what I mean? And it really made me think about the ways in which I can set myself up for success in life and living a long life. I know at the beginning of your book, you guys reference a friend of yours, Dan Wetner, who wrote a book called Blue Zones. And I wonder if you could give people a little bit about background about what blue zones are and what we can learn from them when we start to really look at what it means to live a long, healthy, and happy life.
So glad you referenced Blue Zones. We love Dan. He's also another fellow Miami resident, just last week. And, the Blue Zones are essentially areas of the world where people live the longest lives. And they're also, again, they're not just living long lives, they're flourishing. And he went out as a journalist and took a look, like, what are these people doing? What's so special? And there are a couple of things that really stood out to us, and the one where I'm going to spend the time, because I think there are parallels to what's happening in America right now, I think often ignored. These people have very strong connection, and these people also have a strong sense of purpose. And I think those are two areas where we're just not doing well. And I think in the wellness world, we tend to ignore those two. I think it's very easy. I think most people understand if they're not eating well, if they're not exercising, but if they're not emotionally well, I think that's a harder conversation to have with oneself. You have to think of, who would you, the common question you'll hear is, who would you call in the middle of the night, in a crisis situation? And maybe there's no one to call. Maybe you have to ask yourself some hard questions. And so, with that said, that, bringing it back to connection, we'll start there. There was a study in 2019 that Cigna conducted that reported that half of Americans said they have a meaningful day-to-day social interaction, 50% in 2019.
Wow.
Can you imagine how low that number is today coming out of COVID?
Right.
It's insane. And then you have another study at a BYU that essentially said loneliness is equated with smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
And then another study, researchers found that people who were socially isolated were 45% more likely to get sick with a common cold. And then perhaps, one of our favorite references, direct to exercise and nutrition, found that exercise lowers mortality risk by 20 to 40%. Good diet is about 30%. But being in a good romantic relationship, having friends, being connected to your community can lower your mortality risk by 45%. So here we have meaningful IRL connection is something that isn't expensive, doesn't really take a lot of time, although I think you do have to invest in friendships. and we're ignoring it. And this
Right.
is this is a blue zones principle and something we're passionate about, given the mental health crisis right now in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you make such a good point there. We are more isolated than ever, yet more connected socially on social media than ever. And I know Harvard, I think it was that came out with this study not too long ago that talking about the impact of loneliness and the need for community. I was just telling you guys before we started recording that I had a moment personally over the last week where I was just in so much gratitude because I said, I think for the first time in my life, I'm really experiencing everything I ever thought I wanted. And the biggest thing at the top of that list is community, and how much I feel personally that my life is drastically better because of the community and the people and the relationships that I have. And yet I know that I am not the standard. It's very rare that people have that type of connection in their life, and I think one thing to ask you guys, I would ask is like, how do people get started if connection is such a big deal for our well-being and our overall longevity, and if there's someone at home listening right now feeling extremely lonely, where would you tell them to start on their wellness journey of creating more connection, but also maybe looking at some of these other aspects like nutrition or sleep or uh, purpose?
So for connection specifically, this is an area where I've got some work to do.
Mm,
In that, in my 20s, I had such a great big group of friends from college and high school, and we went out all the time, and it was such a big, great, large group. And then as I got older, work started to work more, and then married, then kids, and started to dwindle, and I lost touch with a lot of people.
hmm
I can do better there, and I actually don't think I'm uncommon. I think it actually happens to men a lot more than it does to women. We're not so good about keeping in touch.
mm,
And with that said, I posed this question to Esther Perel. What do you recommend for getting back in touch? Because, are you going to, for some people that's maybe scary, or am I get rejected? What are they going to say? And her advice I thought was very sound. And I've done this a few times. It's as simple as a text
mm,
saying, hey, been thinking of you for reason X or Y. Hope you're well. Would love to reconnect. It's been too long. Something that simple. And you would be surprised by the response. And you'll know very quickly if this person is up for reconnecting by one, if they respond, or two, how if they respond. And
yeah.
the couple times I've done that with some people I haven't spoke to in over a decade, it's been really impressive. And I encourage everyone to do that, to reconnect and reach out. And especially men listening. I think men are terrible here. Colleen's way better than
Mm,
I am.
Yeah, and I think there has to be an intentionality to it.
right.
In the same way that we schedule or we, think about what we're going to eat that week, you have to motivate yourself to put it on the calendar, maybe even set a goal of, okay, I want to see my friends IRL once a month, or whatever the meaningful metric is for you in your life, but there has to be an intentionality about it to make it actually happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this is one of those quotes that you hear a lot, but in order to have a friend, you got to be a friend, and
Yeah.
it's so simple, but it really is. And it just can start with a simple text of how are you, how you doing? It's been a while, and that can feel super vulnerable, but it can also be the thing that leads to the, the connection that you're looking for and that you're craving. I think that's super, super important. What are some of the other roadblocks to well-being? Connection being one of those. I know there are many more. What do you guys see as some of the biggest challenges that we face to achieving well-being?
I mean, should we start with sleep?
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
and just to emphasize, like I do think this one just doesn't get enough emphasis. We'll start with breath and sleep. Colleen mentioned breath, and then we started this way in the book because, okay, let's think about, like, what are the major objections that people have? Time and money.
Right.
Totally get it, because we're getting it now, and we're in this business. And, if you think about breath, again, we breathe between 17 and 30,000 times a day. And most of us are doing it wrong. 50 to 80% of adults exhibit what we call dysfunctional breathing patterns. And what's so powerful about breath is, if you think about it, it's free. We're doing it all day. You have to do it to survive.
Right.
Like, period. We're breathing right now. And the downstream effects are so significant, but just by the simple practice of nasal breathing through your nose. What that does, filters out bad stuff, the bacteria, the viruses, increases CO2 tolerance, increases your oxygen absorption. So there's physiological resilience. That's 2. Increases nitric oxide, which increases circulation, helps cardiovascular, talk about heart disease, arteries. And then 4, a big one, look, people are stressed, people are anxious, and you're more likely to be in fight or flight mode when you're breathing through your mouth versus nasal breathing. And so this is a big one. So if you think about, like, okay, I don't have time for all this wellness, I don't have the money. Well, let's start with breathing, because we're doing it all the time. And the downstream effects are so powerful, and everything gets better.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about being a nostril breather, as someone who has a tendency to want to jump in and interrupt and get my point out, it actually makes you such a better listener too. One of the wonderful side effects.
And just on that, I think as a society, we have a problem right now with there's a lot of people can't disagree on various topics, everything from politics to health and well-being.
Sure.
And I think we could use a lot more empathy, a lot more curiosity. And what it comes down to, if you think about it, as humans, we have stimulus and response, and humans are unique than other animals where we can actually do something within that. We have that space between stimulus, maybe I read something or I hear something I don't like, and then respond, how I respond. And the better we can get about that response, I think the better we're all going to be. And nasal breathing is one of those practices that can help you get better. And we all need to get better, myself included.
Oh man, I couldn't agree with you more. Longtime listeners of this show know my heart for breath. I went through a 10-month breathwork facilitator program because it had changed my life so significantly. And I was able to, for the first time, experience what it felt like to feel my own love as well, because I had been living in such a hypervigilant, stressed out, dysregulated state. And as a byproduct, I was always in my head, which I was anxious and constantly thinking about what I needed to do or what had happened. And I was lacking presence, and breath brought me into my body and into this moment in ways I had never experienced before. And so I'm a huge advocate, cheerleader, and proponent of breath, and just starting to notice your breath is, in my experience, when you notice your breath, you notice your life. It is the thing that connects you to this 3D experience in this human body. And without it, we're not here. It's the thing that we do first when we enter this world and the last thing we do before we leave it. It's, for me, it's a connection to the multidimensionality of who we are and to the divine. And yet we don't even think about the fact that we do it. And we take for granted that our bodies are so wise and intelligent. They already know how to breathe. Yet, as the CEO of our health, I think we become and step into that role when we start to acknowledge and become responsible for the way we're breathing instead of just breathing unconsciously. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. You mentioned sleep. Talk a little bit more about that.
Sleep has been, hugely personal to me because I struggled with sleep probably starting in college, and there was a moment at my first real job where I had to do a presentation in front of senior leaders, and it could potentially affect my job placement. And this event just spun out of control in my head, and to a point where I didn't sleep for about 3 nights in a row. I ended up at the hospital, saw a doctor. He gave me a Xanax. I got to sleep that night, but it didn't really affect the underlying issues. And obviously there's a lot to unpack there from, kind of childhood of why this was causing me so much stress. But that was one of those moments where it's like, okay, this is getting out of control. And sleep is something where if you don't sleep for 3 days, you are not physically okay. You might miss the gym for a week. You might not eat vegetables for a week. You're still going to be functioning, but that's not happening with sleep. And 33% of Americans right now don't get enough sleep. 50 and 70 million US adults have a sleep disorder. And sleep for me is the start of what we call the wellness wave. When you get that momentum, when one thing starts working in your life, it's so much easier to start bringing in more positive changes. Momentum begets momentum.
Mm-hmm.
So if you sleep, you're probably going to have a better breakfast. You're probably going to have the energy to move throughout the day and integrate that into your life. So I just think it's so foundational
Mm-hmm.
to health and well-being.
I couldn't agree more. I talk a lot about the game of life on this show and how to play it. And you guys are giving us those fundamentals right now, really. I mean, breath, sleep being one of them. I say if you want to be the champion of your life, which is the CEO of your health, right, the way you guys say it, then you got to do the basics better. And these are the basics, right? Starting with your breath, starting with your sleep. And you just named it. The statistics are crazy, showing how many of us struggle, whether it's just with restlessness or insomnia or whatever it might be. And I know there are people listening that need help in that area. And your book is a great place for them to start to get some more information on that, as well as MindBodyGreen website. Are there any others in terms of roadblocks to our best, healthiest lifestyle, and that someone might be able to hear and listen and identify for themselves is, oh, this might be something that's in the way of me feeling my absolute best?
So another big one, and this goes hand in hand, it's resistance training and making sure you're consuming enough protein.
Mm-hmm.
And so, look, working out, going to the gym, building muscles is not something new, but I think in the context of longevity, it is. And there is a unbelievably depressing statistic where 25% of people over the age of 65 fall.
Mm-hmm.
If you fall, and 25%, I'll start over. 25% over the age of 65 fall. If you fall once, you are twice as likely to fall again.
Right.
If you fall and break your hip, there is a 30 to 40% chance that you die within a year.
Wow.
Keep in mind, it's not necessarily the breaking of the hip that can lead to mortality within a year. It's everything that happens after from, maybe there's an infection in the hospital or a complication, or you get a virus, or you go home and you're not mobile and you're depressed, or it leads to something else. But unfortunately, those numbers are real. We've seen this anecdotally play out with friends of ours and their family members. And so if you take a step back, like, okay, how do I avoid this? Because this is a real concern in terms of longevity. Well, okay, let's say maybe I lose my balance. You want to be able to have the mobility to maybe, and the strength to maybe grab something so you don't fall, or have the armor in terms of muscles where you do fall, you have that cushion.
Right.
And going back to balance, or just maybe have the balance where you just don't fall.
Right.
Period. And so this really, for us, made the case for, hey, we need to focus on resistance training. This is funny, but it's a real serious story. About 6 or 7 months ago, I noticed I had lost a little weight, and I don't really weigh myself that often. I kind of felt, look, the clothes fit the same. And then I looked in the mirror and I said, oh my God, I'm developing white man's ass, like old white man's ass. Like I'm becoming an old man, and I'm losing my ass. My basketball butt is becoming flat. And we live in Miami now, so. But beyond the aesthetic, I was like, oh wow, this totally makes sense. Since the last time I did any sort of resistance training or squats with my legs was the last college basketball game I played 25 years ago. So okay, that makes total sense. And it was a wake up call, because sarcopenia is real. It's very real. Up to 13% of people in their 60s suffer from it. And let's say you make it to your 80s, half of people live with it. And so this idea of losing bone density, muscle mass, we lose 1% the year after 40. And so if unaddressed, it can lead to osteoporosis. So like it goes to the why of resistance training, yoga saved me from back surgery. So yoga became my everything, and I ignored resistance training, and, my ass paid the price for it. Uh, and so getting back to that and trying to build lean muscle mass, not for, vanity, but for longevity.
Sure.
And to do so that's the thing I want everyone should focus on. You don't have to go to a gym if you don't want to. You can do sit-ups, push-ups, squats, or lots of great. Your body is a tremendous asset here, using your own body weight. And to get there, you have to consume protein. Muscle protein synthesis has been proven over and over, and you need to ingest enough amount of protein. Unfortunately, the RDA of 0.36 grams per pound of body weight is the bare minimum for people to survive, not thrive. That's for people sitting on the couch. And if you're serious about building lean muscle mass, you probably need to double that, maybe triple that. And so that's something I don't think enough people are focused on. And the science is unequivocal. And so that's become a focus for us in our 40s in the context of we want to be strong and able and mobile. So that doesn't happen to us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just wondering, for those that might be listening and hearing what you're talking about, the emphasis and the importance of all of these things, whether it be diet, movement, exercise, sleep, reducing stress, right, having connections in your life, it can, and we mentioned this at the beginning of this conversation, it can feel overwhelming about where do I start? What thing is the most important? How do I prioritize these things in my life, especially when I'm a busy mom or I'm running a business, right? Like that was your story in so many ways. And I know we all can relate to that in some way or another. Is there a place that you recommend that people start? I mean, is there one thing that's more important than another?
I think they're all important. And I'd say start where you are. And reframe your mindset in terms of, maybe I'm not adding, I'm editing. I am making wellness or well-being work for me. I'm fitting it to my life, my busy schedule. Something I do, I take the stairs. And so I have a personal rule. If it's less than 5 flights, I take the stairs. How long, and I'm in pretty good shape, how long does it take 5 flights? Less than 30 seconds. So let's say you're not in good shape. Maybe it takes a minute, assuming obviously you're able-bodied, but everyone can do that. Don't hop in the elevator. If there's an elevator, take the stairs, work it into your commute.
And I think the hardest work is you have to be the one who best understands your own body and what you need. You can read all the books, but at the end of the day, you really are that conductor of your healthcare, your healing, your whatever you want to call it, orchestra. And you have to be the one to kind of lean into what will give you the highest impact. Like for me, it's sleep. Jason doesn't really struggle with sleep. He could have like coffee at 3 p.m. and, unless our kids wake us up.
So say I did last night.
He's in pretty good shape. And when you read these 8 pillars, sure, it can feel like a lot. So you have to focus in on what's going to have the biggest impact and start there. And for us, it's about integration. It's not additive. It's how do we incorporate this into our daily life so that it's sustainable, so that it's actually something you do.
And it's got to bring you joy. It's got to fit into your lifestyle. National Quitters Day at the gym was January 13th this year. Wow. Because people set expectations that are not reasonable and they end up doing something they don't like. It doesn't fit in their lifestyle. And look, I get it. I think there's a notion in health and wellness where you need to be uncomfortable to be comfortable. Someone once asked us, what's your favorite healthy food that you don't like, but you eat? And our response was nothing. Like we don't, there's enough, we could find something we like. And I hate running. I don't run. The last time I ran was when I played basketball. Not going to happen. In one of our chapters is around cold therapy is very exciting. There's a lot of science. You'll see a lot of cold plunges on Instagram.
Oh, yeah.
And
a lot of bros.
A lot of bro. And if you like it, great. We don't like it. Like that we live in Miami now. Like we escaped the cold. You live in Vegas. Like this sounds science there. And look, if you can do it and you feel good, go for it. But like to us, it's just not enjoyable. So you know what? We're going to skip that one. And I think there's so much pressure in this world where you have to eat this or you have to do this exercise or buy this gadget. And you know what? It's nonsense. You need to find the things that you can integrate in your life and find you joy and stick with them. Because you know what? When push comes to shove, when you get busy and if you don't like it, you're going to drop it.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, sometimes the place that we end up starting is the place we're in the most pain. Right. So
Yeah.
Hmm.
if you are just really struggling with like insomnia, maybe that's the place to start. Or if you've got sciatic back pain, you can't do anything, but you can't ignore that. Right. And so it requires your attention wherever you're in pain.
And be gentle with yourself. Be patient. I think one of the things that, Colleen talks about in the book, it is, to some degree, she accepts that she's never going to be a rock star sleeper, and that's okay. And doesn't it's very easy, and it's not just sleeping, it could be anything where you start to have performance anxiety, and then
Yeah.
expectations are set where you set yourself up for failure, and you got to start small and you got to be kind to yourself. It's a process.
It's absolutely a journey, and you still are the one who knows your body best, even when you're working with the best experts. And one example of this is sleep. Even though I have really thoughtful and disciplined about sleep etiquette, Jason and I get a lot of joy out of watching TV in bed. And every sleep expert will tell you, no, like that's
Right.
breaking all the rules. But you have to look at your life of, okay, like what's gonna bring me joy? And is it gonna impact my sleep? Not as much as coffee, not as much as having an overactive racing mind that's not spinning in a productive way. Like those I know are my bigger triggers. So once you get to that point, you really do have the ability to gently make your own rules.
I love that you guys are giving people permission to make their own decisions and do what feels best for them, and really to become aware of what their needs are and creating, a format for well-being that works for them. I love that. Because we are all different, and we all have different preferences and things that I think as we experiment with these things, we get to know ourselves a little bit better, And I love what you said too, Colleen, about this being a journey. Because when I think about my own life, it has been one step at a time. When I first started to get conscious of, and responsible for my life in all aspects, I remember, for the first year, really kind of looking in the mirror at all of the ways I had been avoiding things emotionally, right? So I really started to look at my mental and emotional health. And then I did that for quite a while, a year, 2 years, 3 years. That was really the focus. And then there was a prompting, not because I had any illness or disease or anything like accident, but I could tell like the next thing my life was asking me to look at was my physical health. So getting my hormones looked at, getting off birth control, finding more natural alternatives to things, right? And then it's looked at my sexual health. Look at what is that like? We'll look at my connections. Like, and it's just evolved over time because it really is impossible to do it all and to do it all at once, right? And so it's just sort of like biting off a bit at a time, especially, and I just encourage you guys, if you're listening, to like start where you are, like exactly where Jason said. And you guys were also mentioning, it's kind of hard to know, regardless of if it's your diet or your exercise, like which thing to do, because we were talking about being vegan before we started recording, or keto, or Orange Theory, or F45, or yoga, like which thing to do. I'm curious, is there any wellness or workout diet trend that you guys are particular fans of, and what do you think are kind of the most overrated trends that are out there right
How much time do you have?
now? Give me your top
Look,
one or two.
I think nutrition and food. Look, food is foundational,
Mhm.
and what you ingest is really critical to your well-being. Keeping that in mind, it is so confusing, and there is so much information, specifically in a world that's driven by content on social media. It is impossible to sift through.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the algorithms are reward anger. Uh,
Hmm.
there was a study that Wharton did, analyzing the New York Times. We cite this in the book, of the most emailed articles in the New York Times.
Oh, wow.
And they classified them, and these are like the most widely read articles in the world. It's New York Times. And they classified these articles by emotion. And the top three were anxiety, awe, and anger.
Mhm.
Anger was number one at 34%. So in other words, anger increased virality by 34%. So anger drove more engagement, more reads, views, watches, clicks, comments. And if you take a step back, like that's pretty scary and actually makes sense for the world we live in. And
Right.
so bringing it back to food and people driving the food conversation, we're incentivized by having extreme points of view there that can be incendiary. And so, with all of that said, I think what we believe is you should eat real food. Look, processed food happens, but we think you should try to minimize it. But the consequences of eating ultra processed food, we're serious. There's a study in France where said that 10% increase of highly processed food led to a 14% increased risk of death.
Hmm.
Bad news is in the US, 66% of calories consumed by kids come from highly processed foods.
And in terms of the trends that I incorporate into my life, it's resistance training, which I do here. There's a boutique fitness class literally in my building. And to me, it's one of those like habit stacking that like happens in a really organic way, because there's a ton of moms who go to the same school, who also go to the class. There's great proximity. So I'm getting social connection. It's way more fun than doing it by myself. And it brings me a lot of joy. And then second, which I would put in, to answer your trendy question, is pickleball. We do it more, but here in Miami, we have definitely picked it up. It brings us a lot of joy, and has great benefits too. But it's really being out there, having fun. You have to put down your social device. You're really connecting. You can't be on your phone and with a pickleball racket at the same time. So it's another great way to engage.
Sorry, I just voiced my frustration with food and with nutrition influencers on social media. I didn't really the question. I'm just like,
I was bringing it back.
Well, when you said that, Jason, my mind immediately went to the guy who was like the meat eater guy influencer. Yes. And then it came out that he was like actually on steroids or something. But that's kind of the misleading information that's out there. It's like, eat a raw piece of meat and you'll be this, you know what I mean? And everybody's selling some kind of, there's a pitch almost in everything kind of that you see nowadays. And so you were so right in saying, like, thinking it's easy to be caught up or misled. So I definitely hear it.
And I think, we have, without being prescriptive, we're saying, where some people will say, well, you must be 100% plant-based or vegan or paleo or carnivore. We know a lot of people in this space who thrive on various diets. And look, we're all individuals.
Mm-hmm.
We believe in bio-individuality. And so we do have a set of principles, which we outline in the book, which we think are generally good for most people. But then we really encourage the reader to, one, listen to their body, and then two, do some basic lab work that's inexpensive, just to get an understanding how things are affecting your markers. There are some people, for example, who could eat meat at every meal and their lipid panel's fine. There are other people who look at meat and their lipid panel goes through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I encourage everyone to figure this out. We have some guiding principles and some tips on labs in the book that people can take with them.
Well, I'm going to say, to Colleen's point, I just got some pickleball rackets, so I'm excited to try it out. And to your point, Jason, I think that's really good advice for people. Just if you can, if it's accessible to you, go get some lab work done. That was a really formative, transformative experience for me, because I really got to see behind the curtain. Even as somebody who's lost multiple family members to cancer, I get regularly screened and do blood work every year. But my doctor never told me what the results were. He was like, I'll call you if it's something, right? But I wanted to become more in charge of my health. And so I went to a holistic practitioner that actually did some blood work and really let me see things like my blood sugar levels and my iron. And what I found is I had, different things that I wasn't expecting, but I had a roadmap for how I could best take care of my health now. Now I was informed. And in that way, it's like I always say knowledge is power, or knowledge isn't power, and applied knowledge is, but I could take that knowledge and then really decide how to move forward. So I think you become so much more empowered when you have that information at your fingertips. So I agree. And if you have accessibility and you can do that for yourself, I highly recommend it. Just to wrap up this conversation, I want just take you back a little while and ask you, what would you say to yourselves? Because you've given so much great advice, and you've really made this super clear for people in your book, The Joy to Wellbeing. It's a really practical guide for people. And there are people in all different aspects of their life and on their journey here. But if you guys were to go back maybe a decade ago, when you're in your 20s, like, what would you tell yourself if you could go back and talk to them in terms of how to be an advocate for yourself, and what may be the best practices you would really encourage them to do and to implement then? If you could talk to yourself in your 20s, what would that advice be?
Listen to those whispers in the body so that you don't have to get to that breakdown point where you're forced to make the change, but where you can make it gradually along the journey. It's just a much more loving way to get your body back into health and well-being.
And I think for me, realizing it is a journey, and I feel like for much of my life, I'm in a rush to the next thing.
Yeah.
I'm ready to finish college, or I'm ready for this job to end and go to the next thing. I'm ready for this milestone in the business, or I'm ready for this thing, moving. And I wish I would have enjoyed the journey a little bit more. It's something I'm really trying to do with our children. You hear all the time, when you meet someone else who has a kid who's much older, and they'll say, "Oh, it goes so fast." It's a cliche, but it's true. And I'm really trying to be mindful of the time we have with our children. And with regards to health, and the health literacy is just so critical. I do advocate for everyone trying to be their own CEO, and that's kind of our goal with the book. Knowledge is empowerment.
Yeah.
And you need to be educated. And I think this idea that there's this one doctor or this one healer or this one thing who's got to have all the answers. We know a lot of the best of them. And you know what? They're not perfect, and they make mistakes. And ultimately, no one knows you better than you. And you need to be educated, and you need to take control of your health to the best of your ability, and get to the point where, you can filter in and out, whether that's soliciting an opinion online somewhere or soliciting an opinion from a doctor, because it is nuanced. Things are developing very fast in this space, and ultimately, you know better than anybody.
Yeah. So good. Such good advice. You guys, your book, The Joy of Wellbeing, a practical guide to happy, healthy, and long life, is on pre-order now. Is there anything you want people to know, listeners to know, about where they can go find the book, or just any other tips you have before you guys go today?
So, to close, I want to bring it back to community. I just can't emphasize this enough, given where we are in the world. It's concerning, given our kids and the mental health epidemic. And there's a study in the book which has become my favorite study. And in some ways, I'm like, this is the best study that no one wants to talk about, because I think it throws a lot of what we know about nutrition and exercise on its head. And it's the Rosetto study. And Rosetto, Pennsylvania was this small rural town in the 1950s. And this is when heart disease arrives in America, but not in Rosetto. In Rosetto, people over 65, the rate of heart attacks was half that of the nation. Under 55, there were no cases of heart disease. Heart disease was completely absent. So they take a look, like, what's going on in Rosetto? What are these people doing? What are they doing? They're smoking, they're drinking, they're eating lots of pasta and meatballs. This makes absolutely no sense. Like, what's the secret? When they took a closer look, they realized this was such a strong community that was so closely knit. They had unbelievable social connections. Multi-generational living was paramount. There were lots of parties, parades, people enjoying wine and food with family and friends. Then in the 1960s, community starts to break up. People start to move away. Guess what? Heart disease catches up with the national average. And to me, this study just says it all. We're so focused on nutrition and exercise. And yes, foundational is so important. But given where we are in the world right now, we really need to focus on connection.
Mm, so true. So, so, so important. That's why I'm so grateful for friends like you, resources like MindBodyGreen, and shows like this where we can connect from even across the country, because there are some good things about technology and social media. It allows us to connect with good-hearted people who are on similar missions as we are here at the Coachable podcast. I'm just so grateful for your work, and I want to make sure everyone knows how they can access MindBodyGreen and how they can get your book, The Joy of Wellbeing. I think it's thejoyofwellbeing.com is where they can get the book on pre-order. And I think you guys are super, super generous. You're going to give $25 off any purchase of the in the shop, and free access to the Sleep Doctor's top 10 tips for best sleep. So if you struggle with sleep, you're going to get
I'm like,
access.
he's a sleep doctor. Like, this guy is the best.
Yeah.
And has helped. And even me, even I don't struggle with my sleep as like Colleen does, although I did last night. He is the best. Like, we're so psyched about that offering. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we're so excited. Make sure you go follow MindBodyGreen on Instagram. And we're going to make sure to link all of this stuff down in the show notes for you, so that you can make it easy to access. And make sure you go get the book, The Joy of Wellbeing, a practical guide to happy, healthy, and long life. Colleen, Jason, thank you so much for your time. You're welcome back always on the Coachable podcast, you guys. Thanks so much. This was amazing. That's all for this week, guys. Go be coachable. We'll see you next week on the Coachable podcast.